Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Gentlemen, we've got elections to the Scottish Parliament, to the Welsh Assembly, to the English local government areas, to London Mayor and Assembly. Now, Labour's fighting in all of these areas. How do we judge Mr Corbyn's party's performance?
I think he needs a symbolic victory in London. In many ways, it will matter less than doing well in English local council elections, because councils are your campaigning base for a general election in 4 years' time. But it's a much sexier office, the London Mayor, and if Sadiq Khan wins, I think that gets him out of quite a bit of trouble, gets Jeremy Corbyn out of quite a bit of trouble, deservedly or not. The result I'm beginning to think might end up being quite historic is in Scotland. If the Conservatives finish second, then I think it establishes two things. One is that this idea that a left-wing Labour Party can recover some of the ground lost to the SNP, a very popular idea during the leadership contest last summer, will suffer. And more significant, I think, is that if the Tories finish second, it will confirm Ruth Davidson as the most interesting, maybe the most talented politician of the next generation. And there will be a lot of pressure from the London branch of the Tory party to tempt her down in some form.
What mean to take away the only winner the Tories might have had in 2 generations?
Yeah, there is a perverse incentive to actually to turn their backs on the achievement or the impending achievement in Scotland, because she could be a potentially compelling UK-wide figure.
At the end of the day, if Mr Corbyn holds on to London, which the polls tell us he will, then he's okay.
I think the Tories must be praying that he'll be okay. He really is the gift that goes on giving.
Or what do you think in the Tory interest not to hold on, for the Tories not to hold on to London? You think it's in the Tory interest?
No, I think it's in the Tory interest that Corbyn survive as leader, because nobody else could possibly be as good for the Tories, except maybe the Shadow Chancellor. I mean, I think the people who are not paying terribly close attention to the detail of this row, even though it's got such spectacular attention that they must be aware at least the vague issues. But there's just a conclusion, I'm sure, beginning to surface, that the Labour Party is being run by crazy people. And if they choose the Shadow Chancellor, who is actually a much harder character, would be a much more muscular version of Corbyn, and probably less incompetent looking, more impressive as a personality, that means that the hold of the hard left on Labour will be embedded for a political generation, another 3 or 4 years. And that would be a different problem for the Tories, because they wouldn't just be able to make him look ludicrous.
Okay. How has it come about that here is the first electoral test for the government since it won the election last May? It's a year on, and normally we judge these elections by, so how is the government faring? Not yet mid-term, but is it beginning to lose support? And yet all the yardsticks seem to be about Labour, not the Tories.
Well, they have been about Labour for the last sort of 72 hours since they've got into this crisis of the row over anti-Semitism. But before that, the only thing we were talking about was the referendum. And the reason perhaps why we're not sort of focusing so much on the Conservatives and how they're doing is that David Cameron really hasn't taken any interest in these elections on Thursday. He's absolutely focused on the EU referendum, because for him it is, whatever he says, a matter of life and death. He loses the referendum on the 23rd of June. That's the end of his premiership. That's the end of George Osborne, and the right of the party will be in the ascendancy. So in a way, it's much, much bigger than his own political survival. But can I just say about Thursday? What is interesting about Thursday is that the London election is actually the least significant election. When you want to know how is Labour going to do in the general election, you need to look at Scotland, and you need to look at the English locals, and you need to look at Wales. But London will be symbolically the most significant election, because if, as we assume, Sadiq Khan wins there, as Janan was saying, that will tick the I've got a victory in my back pocket box, and Jeremy Corbyn will, for the moment, soldier on.
Well, you mentioned how these elections, important as they are, have been overshadowed by the referendum coming up on June the 23rd. And both the Leave and Remain campaigns have been putting out what are in effect commercials. They're going out online. Let's have a look at them.
At the end of the war, Britain created the NHS. It protects us throughout our lives. But it's in danger. You can help it.
When I grow up, I want to be a fireman, a police officer so I can ride a fast car, a ballerina, football player, hairdresser, school teacher, doctor, a knight.
Remaining in Europe will create an extra 790,000 UK jobs by the time these kids are grown up.
Well, there we go. The first one obviously for leave, the second one there for remain. Now, remain going on the economy because the polls suggest they're winning that argument on the economy is important. But the private polling also suggests that the NHS and immigration do well for leave. That's why we've seen that there. What's going on here?
Well, they've looked at the private polling and concluded that on the economy, Remain has a lead which is more or less insurmountable before June 23rd. On immigration, Leave have a similarly insurmountable lead before June 23rd. Rather than engage in a futile attempt to win back credibility on immigration, if you're Remain, or on the economy, if you're Leave, it is better to just spend every day trying to focus the debate on your home territory. And that's why I think if on the ballot in 7 weeks' time, the average voter sees the question as what is the best way of controlling immigration, then Leave will win. And if the question is how do you preserve economic stability, then it's for Remain. It's almost two parallel campaigns rather than two attempts to answer the same question.
By this time next week, when the Thursday election results will have been analysed and so on, the EU referendum campaign starts proper, all the way to June the 23rd. Does the Remain side not have a problem that it seems to have fired quite a lot of its ammunition already?
It has, with that sort of great big 200-page Treasury report. But remember, we've got round 2 of the Treasury reports, because that report that we had, whenever it was 10 days ago, was looking at the long-term consequences of an exit from the European Union. There's one more report to go. That is the immediate consequences, which is basically going to say that there would be an almighty recession and the pound would go through the floor.
Interest rates would have to rise.
But remember, we've got sort of 2 phases of the campaign. We've got about, I think it's about 2.5 to 3 weeks after the local elections until Purdah comes in. Up until that point, the government can put out any document that it wants. It can get civil servants to write in favour of British membership of the European Union. For the final 28 days, which is obviously from the very end of May until the 23rd of June, there's Purdah, and what that means is that ministers can say what they like, but they cannot use government machinery and government publications. So you're going to watch a great blast from the government side in those sort of 3 weeks after the local elections.
Well, on the Remain side claiming that there'll be 800,000 new jobs if we stay in the EU. Things like that should come with a massive health warning. They usually have no idea in or out what the new jobs will be. But on the Leave side, has it really got anything to do with the NHS?
No, actually, no. But it was interesting that one of the most effective shots that the Remain camp thought they'd fired, that Downing Street thought they'd fired, was Barack Obama being shot out of a cannon. And that was supposed to be the end of the story. Wow, we've got this endorsement. This is going to swing the whole thing. Story over. We've won. The Leave campaign actually increased slightly. It's now virtually neck and neck with Remain.
The polls are
in some
remarkably
cases
close at this stage.
Yeah, and it's obvious that if Obama's effect was anything, it was counterproductive. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all. I find, this is my adopted country, I find the British the most resilient people against being threatened and bullied of any people in the world. During the general election campaign, every time Nicola Sturgeon said, we're going to lock David Cameron out of Downing Street, I heard a chorus in my head of British people saying, oh yeah, and that's exactly what I heard when Barack Obama was speaking.
Right. Well, you mentioned Barack Obama. Last night was the famous White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think it's in the basement of the Washington Hilton Hotel. It's a time for comedy and comedy acts, even from the politicians. The President began actually by talking about his visit to here, so it's still in his mind. Let's listen.
Even some foreign leaders, they've been looking ahead, anticipating my departure. Last week, Prince George showed up to our meeting in his bathrobe. That was a slap in the face. A clear breach of protocol. Although while in England, I did have lunch with Her Majesty the Queen, took in a performance of Shakespeare, hit the links with David Cameron. Just in case anybody is still debating whether I'm black enough. I think that settles the debate.
Well, the president there showing that he has great comedic timing as well. He could be a stand-up man when he steps down from the White House. You've been to the Westminster dinner. It's not quite on the same scale.
It's not quite on the same scale. You know, we'd like to do it, but I mean, the most important thing this year is George Osborne. The year before it was Ed Miliband. The year before that it was David Cameron. Their speech is on the record, but it's not filmed. And it was interesting. George Osborne delivered what was generally perceived as a very, very good joke because he told jokes at his own expense. It's quite a funny one about I'm now on the 5-2 diet. I've had to eat my words after 2 of my budget.
No, he did tell some jokes. Not quite as good as the president's, but he did tell some jokes. This is your last week with us on the Sunday Politics. You're off to Newsnight. And so we whipped together to get you a farewell present. And there it is there, the Daily Sunday Politics mug.
But you only get that if you win a competition.
Well, that's just how kind we are to you. Enjoy it, because you'll never get anything like that on Newsnight.
Greatly honoured.
Well, thank you.
I've been getting away with